Where did you learn that song? The question hung frozen in the cold evening air. On a busy downtown corner, a young street violinist played, her eyes closed in deep focus. And 60 feet away, a billionaire in a cashmere coat had stopped dead, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The melody she was playing was an unpublished lullaby, a song that existed only in one place, the memory of his late mother. A song that should have been impossible for anyone else in the world to know. Her name is Maya, a 20-year-old music student who plays on street corners to pay her rent. His name is Eli Vance, a reclusive tech billionaire whose mother, a brilliant but unknown composer, passed away 7 years ago. In that moment, on a sidewalk shimmering with evening rain, two lives from opposite worlds collided over a sequence of notes that should not exist outside of Eli's family. This is the story of an impossible song. A melody with no paper trail, no recording, that traveled from a deathbed to a homeless shelter to the strings of a street violin, and the haunting question that would unravel both their lives: how? To understand the impossibility of this moment, you need to understand the two worlds that existed before it collided. In one world, there was Maya. Every morning, she left her 300-square-foot studio apartment with its persistent smell of damp carpet and yesterday's rice. She attended classes at the conservatory on a patchwork of scholarships and loans, her talent undeniable, her bank account perpetually hovering near zero. The violin case at her feet wasn't a prop, it was her economic engine. Studies show that for street performers, income is wildly unpredictable. Some days you might clear $100 an hour, other days you play for 4 hours and walk away with spare change. Maya knew this calculus intimately. She played not for fame but for groceries. Her chosen corner, where the financial district bled into the old city center, offered a steady stream of distracted pedestrians. Most walked by without looking, their ears filled with podcasts or their own thoughts. This was the reality Joshua Bell proved in his famous 2007 experiment, when one of the world's greatest violinists played incognito in a subway station. Over 1,000 people passed, and only 7 stopped to listen. Maya wasn't expecting an audience. She was expecting to be ignored. That was the deal. Her repertoire was a careful mix: Bach partitas to show her training, modern film scores for instant recognition, the occasional folk tune. But every session, without fail, she ended with a particular hauntingly simple lullaby. It had no flashy technique, no dramatic crescendos. It was a melody of pure, aching comfort. She learned it 2 years prior, during the semester she volunteered at the St. Bridget's overnight shelter. There was a woman there, Ms. Ida, who'd hum it every night, a soft, rhythmic sound cutting through the shelter's chorus of coughs and rustling blankets. It calmed people. Maya, fighting her own wave of homesickness and stress, found herself listening for it, memorizing its contours. One evening, she worked it out on her violin quietly in a back office. Ms. Ida had appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. "You play it pretty," she'd said, a rare smile touching her weathered face. "My friend, she used to sing that to me, said her mama made it up just for her." When the shelter found Ida more permanent housing, she left without a forwarding address. But the melody stayed with Maya. It became her secret offering, her final piece for the cold, empty street. In the other world, 73 floors above the same city, was Elijah Vance. His world was one of staggering scale and profound silence. He'd built Vance Industries from a dorm room coding project into a titan of algorithmic trading, his net worth estimated at $4.2 billion. But his greatest loss was immeasurable. His mother, Eleanor Vance, had been a composer of rare, introspective talent. She never sought publication, believing music was for feeling, not for selling. Her compositions lived in a single, leather-bound manuscript and in the memories of her only son. The lullaby was her masterpiece, a melody she composed while pregnant with Eli and sang to him every night of his childhood. It was their private language. After her diagnosis, in the long, fatting afternoons of her final year, she would hum it when the pain was bad. Eli would hold her hand, the familiar notes a thread tethering her to him. She made him promise 2 things: to keep the manuscript private and to remember that some beauty exists only for its own sake. When she died, the music died with her. Eli had the manuscript digitally scanned and encrypted, a digital tomb. He never played the recording. To hear it would be to break. For 7 years, the melody existed in exactly 2 places, locked in a digital vault and etched into the grieving circuitry of a billionaire's brain. Then came that Tuesday evening. Eli was walking to a driverless car after another 12-hour day of managing an empire that felt increasingly like a ghost ship. He was a man moving through a city of millions, yet profoundly alone. And then a sound sliced through the urban white noise, the distant, delicate strain of a violin. It was background music at first. Then his brain, operating on a delay, began to recognize the pattern, the second phrase, the specific, unusual resolution of the fourth measure. His steps slowed. His breath caught. It was neurologically impossible. Research from UC Davis shows that familiar music doesn't just trigger memory. It acts as a full sensory soundtrack, calling back vivid mental images of people and places. In that instant, Eli wasn't on a sidewalk. He was at his mother's piano, sunlight through dusty glass, her hands on the keys. The melody built note perfect, a ghost-made sound. His body acted before his mind could process. He stopped. He turned. And he saw a young woman, eyes closed, pulling his asterisk memory from her violin. The street corner transformed. For Maya, this was just another performance winding down. For Eli, the universe had narrowed to this single, impossible point of convergence. He walked toward her, his financial world composure shattered. The last note hung in the damp air. She opened her eyes, finally noticing the man in the impeccably tailored coat who wasn't moving, wasn't reaching for his wallet, but was just staring. His face was pale, his expression one of pure, unguarded shock. The few other pedestrians flowed around them like water around a stone. "Where?" he said, his voice barely above the traffic rumble but razor-sharp in its intensity. "Did you learn that song?" Maya, still in her post-performance haze, shrugged slightly. "Just a tune I picked up." "You didn't, you couldn't have." He took a step closer. "That melody, it was never published, it was never recorded, it doesn't exist anywhere." A flicker of defensiveness crossed Maya's face. Buskers develop a quick radar for strange interactions. "I learned it from a woman at a shelter. She hummed it, that's all." "What was her name?" The question was urgent, almost desperate. "Ida, I don't know her last name." Eli Vance shook his head, a sharp, frustrated motion. "That's not," he stopped, collecting himself. The billionaire reasserted control over the grieving son. "That song is my mother's composition. She wrote it for me. She died 7 years ago, and I have the only copy locked in a vault." He looked at Maya, his eyes searching hers for a lie, for a trick. "So I will ask you one more time. Where did you learn it?" The weight of his statement, the sheer intensity of his belief, settled over Maya. The coins in her open case suddenly felt insignificant. She had just played a dead woman's private lullaby for a stranger on a street corner, and the stranger was claiming ownership of a ghost. The comfortable mystery of the melody vanished, replaced by a chilling, real-world conundrum. "Come with me," Eli said, not as a request, but as a statement of inevitable next steps. "Right now, we need to figure this out." Maya looked at her violin case, at the darkening sky, at the intense, wealthy man who seemed both horrified and mesmerized. Every instinct told her to say no, to pack up and go home. But the melody, Ms. Ida's smile, the billionaire's shattered composure, it was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. And one terrifying piece was now clear. This was no longer about a song. Someone somewhere had broken a deathbed promise, and the proof was standing on a wet sidewalk, waiting for her answer. Maya's decision in that moment wasn't about trust. It was about the violation of a fundamental law. A song that existed in one locked vault in one man's memory had somehow escaped, and the breach felt personal, almost violent. She nodded, a short, sharp motion. She packed her violin, the coins forgotten in her open case, and followed Eli Vance to a waiting car so silent it seemed to glide above the pavement. They didn't go to a skyscraper penthouse. He took her to a nondescript building in the warehouse district, Advanced Industries Data Security Annex. Inside, past retinal scanners and a door that hissed like a vault, was a room known as the Icebox. It was a physical server room kept at 55 degrees, humming with the sound of 1,000 cooling fans. Here, in a literal fortress, was the digital tomb of Eleanor Vance's music. Eli didn't speak. He typed commands into a terminal. A monitor flickered to life, displaying a scan of handwritten sheet music. The title in elegant cursive read "For Eli Always." He clicked a play icon. A simple, synthesized piano began to play. The melody was identical, note for note, phrase for phrase, the same lullaby that had just echoed off concrete and glass. The proof was undeniable, and it made the mystery even colder. "So," Eli said, his voice flat in the sterile chill. "The chain, the woman at the shelter, Ida, we start there." But St. Bridget's shelter, when they arrived just before curfew, offered no easy answers. The night manager, a weary man named Carl, remembered Ms. Ida. "Quiet lady, stayed with us on and off for about 18 months. She got a housing voucher, moved into a supported living building over on Elmwood, must be 8 months ago." He couldn't give a last name. "Privacy rules," he shrugged, but he did offer one thread. She was tight with another guest, older gentleman, Samuel. "He's still here most nights. You can wait in the dining hall." Samuel was in his 70s with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly. He warmed at the mention of Ida. "Sure, I know Ida. She's in a better place now, thank the Lord." When Eli, struggling to keep his billionaire's impatience in check, asked about the song, Samuel's face softened with recognition. "Oh, that little tune she'd hum. Yeah, it was her comfort. Said she learned it from her angel." "Her angel?" Maya asked. "That's what she called her, the nurse. When Ida was real sick a few years back, pneumonia, she was in the county hospital. There was a palliative care nurse who sat with her, saying that to her when the nights were long. Ida said it was the only thing that made the fear quiet down." Samuel looked between their eager faces. "She said the nurse told her the song was a gift passed along, that it was meant to be shared with people who were hurting." Eli felt the words like a physical blow. A gift passed along. His mother's most private creation turned into a therapeutic tool for strangers. The intention was beautiful. The breach was catastrophic. Tracking down the nurse was an exercise in the fragility of institutional memory. The county hospital had high turnover, but the palliative care unit was small. A veteran social worker, after hearing their story and seeing the raw need in Eli's eyes, made a call. The nurse's name was Anya Petrova. She had retired 2 years ago. She had, the social worker added gently, passed away 6 months after that. Ovarian cancer. The trail, it seemed, had gone cold in the most final way. But Eli Vance was a man who built fortunes on finding patterns in chaos. If Anya Petrova was the vector, she had to have a source. How did a palliative care nurse obtain a melody composed by a reclusive billionaire's mother? The answer, he realized with dawning horror, might lie in the most vulnerable period of his mother's life. The final year, the hospice care. He had hired a full-time private nursing team for his mother. The records were in his home office. He'd never scrutinized them. He'd been too busy grieving. Now he tore through the digital files, and there it was. Anya Petrova's name was not on the private payroll, but a cross-reference with the hospice service they'd occasionally used for respite care showed she had been a fill-in for 3 shifts during a period when his mother's primary nurse was ill. 3 shifts, that was all it took. The next revelation came from Anya Petrova's daughter, Katerina, who lived in a suburban split level an hour from the city. She was wary of the billionaire and the musician at her door, but she recognized the melody when Maya hummed a few bars. Her eyes filled. "That was my mother's song," she said softly. "She called it her peace melody. She said she learned it from one of her most beautiful patients, a composer. She said the woman, in a moment of clarity, taught it to her. Told her it was a small light she could carry to other dark rooms." Katerina brought out a small, cloth-bound journal. She wrote about it. In neat, sloping script, Anya Petrova had described her shift with Eleanor Vance. February 14th. Patient EV was particularly lucid today. We talked about music. She spoke of her son. I told her about my work in the county hospital, the fear I see. She asked me to come closer. Then she sang me the most beautiful, simple lullaby. She said, "This is for Eli, but it is also for you. A song is not a thing to be owned. It is a thing to be given. Take it. Give it to someone who is afraid. That is its purpose. I have never received a gift so precious." Eli read the passage 3 times. The room tilted. The narrative in his head of a secret stolen, a promise broken, shattered and rearranged itself. His mother hadn't been betrayed. She had been the active agent. In her wisdom, in her compassion, she had deliberately released the song into the world. She had given it away. The vault, the encryption, the 7 years of silent grief, it had all been his memorial, not hers. He had built a mausoleum for something she intended to be a seed. The emotional pivot was staggering. The anger drained from him, leaving a vast, hollow confusion. But the practical mystery remained. How did the seed travel from Anya Petrova to Ida to Maya? The journal provided the next link. Anya had indeed used the melody. She noted dates, initials, used the lullaby with patient JS. Terminal restlessness seemed to calm him. Sang it for patient IR Ida Rogers during night terrors from pneumonia. She held my hand and cried. She said it was the first time she felt safe in years. Ida Rogers, they had a full name. With resources now fully deployed, Eli's team located Ida Rogers in her supported living apartment on Elmwood. She was a small, bird-like woman with eyes that held decades of hardship. When Maya walked in, Ida's face lit up. "The violin girl, you play so pretty." Then she saw Eli and a flicker of confusion passed over her face. The story spilled out. Eli carefully explained who he was, who his mother was. Ida listened, her hands clasped tightly. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Your mama," she said finally, her voice a rasp. "She made that song," Eli nodded. Ida's eyes welled up. "Then you tell her thank you. That song, it was the rope I held onto when I was drowning. Nurse Anya, she was an angel, she gave it to me. And she looked at Maya, I guess I gave it to you. I didn't know it was a secret." "It wasn't," Eli said, the words feeling strange and true. "It was a gift. My mother, she wanted it to be a gift." But as they left, a new, more unsettling question began to form. The chain was clear, Alina to Anya to Ida to Maya, a beautiful human chain of comfort. But for Eli, a man whose life was built on systems and control, a new anxiety took root. This was a chain of oral transmission, fragile and unpredictable. It had reached Maya, a trained musician with a perfect ear. What if it had reached someone else? What if, somewhere in the city, this melody, his mother's intimate lullaby, his childhood touchstone, was being used in a commercial jingle, or was being claimed by another artist? The idea of it being loose in the world, unprotected, was suddenly terrifying in a new way. He expressed this fear to Maya as they drove back to the city. She understood immediately. "You're worried about dilution, about corruption of the message." She looked out the window. "But that's what happens when you let art out of its cage. You can't control it." That night, Eli did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He unlocked the digital file of his mother's manuscript and, alone in his soundproofed home studio, played the original recording of her playing the lullaby on the piano. The sound of her fingers on the keys, the faint squeak of the pedal, the warmth of her humming along in the second verse. It undid him. He wept. But for the first time, the grief was not mixed with the sterile poison of preservation. It was mixed with a bewildering pride. His mother's small light had traveled through hospital wards and homeless shelters, bringing peace. It was a legacy far more profound than a locked file. The next morning, he proposed an idea to Maya, a project. He wanted to trace the song's journey completely, to document every person it had touched, to map the invisible network of comfort it had created. He would fund it. She, with her connection to the music and her foot in both worlds, would help lead it. It was an attempt to impose a framework of understanding onto something beautifully chaotic. Maya agreed, seeing in it a chance to understand the full weight of the gift she'd been casually carrying. Their first step was to go back to Anya Petrova's journal and track every patient initial she mentioned. It was slow, ethically fraught work, navigating HIPAA laws and family permissions. But slowly, a constellation emerged. JS was James, a retired teacher who had died with the melody on his lips. His daughter remembered it. IR was Ida. There was a ML, a young woman with cystic fibrosis, who had requested the melody be played at her memorial. Each story was a vignette of solace. Then they hit a record that didn't fit. Anya's journal mentioned a CV in the private duty section, separate from her hospice work. A single entry, April 3rd, provided respite care for the Vance family. Patient EV taught me the lullaby. This was it, the origin point. But the date was wrong. Eli checked his records. Anya's fill-in shift was in February. This April date was over a year asterisk before his mother's final decline. He had no record of Anya Petrova in his home then. None. He confronted Katerina with the discrepancy. Katerina paled. She went to a locked box and retrieved another journal, an earlier one. My mother, she didn't just work for the hospice. Before that, she was a private nurse for an agency. She took short-term assignments. She never told me the names, client confidentiality, but she kept a separate log. She handed it over. Eli's blood ran cold. He flipped through the pages. And there, on a date 15 months before his mother's diagnosis, was an entry that changed everything. Private assignment, the Vance residence. Caring for Mr. Elias Vance Sr. post-cardiac procedure. His father. The entry detailed her week-long stay. It described his father, a difficult patient, and the quiet, kind woman who was his wife, the composer. It described a late-night conversation in the kitchen, a shared cup of tea, a moment of connection. And then the line, she played a little tune on the piano for me, said it was for her son. I told her it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. She smiled and said, then it's for you too. The timeline collapsed. Anya Petrova hadn't learned the song from Eleanor Vance in her final, generous days. She had learned it over a year earlier during a routine assignment. She had carried it with her, and then, when she was assigned to Eleanor again during the terminal illness, she had likely played it or hummed it for her. Eleanor, recognizing her own gift being returned to her, had then formally gifted it again, reinforcing its purpose. The beautiful story of a deathbed blessing was actually a story of a connection that spanned years, a melody that had left the house and come back, enriched. But this revelation opened a chasm of new questions. If Anya had the melody for over a year before Eleanor's final illness, who else might she have shared it with in that time? The network of transmission was potentially much wider and much older than they had imagined. The song had been loose in the world for years, not months. Eli's mind raced to the terrifying, logical conclusion. If it was out there, truly in the wild, then the chance encounter with Maya wasn't a miracle of a short, contained chain. It was the inevitable statistical result of a melody that had been quietly replicating through the city's bloodstream for years, which meant there could be dozens, maybe hundreds of people who knew it. His mother's private lullaby was, for all intents and purposes, a folk song. And that's when the email arrived. It was sent to Vance Industries' public relations desk, forwarded to Eli by a confused assistant. The subject line read, regarding the unauthorized use of my composition. The sender was a man named Leo Sterling. He claimed to be a freelance composer, and he alleged that the melody Elijah Vance was calling his mother's was, in fact, a piece he himself had composed and registered with the Copyright Office 2 years ago. He had heard a street performance of it and was prepared to take legal action. Attached was a copyright certificate and an audio file. Eli played it. It was the lullaby, arranged for synthesizer but unmistakably the same. The walls of the world, which had just expanded, suddenly felt like they were crashing in. The song had not only escaped its cage, it had been captured by someone else, and they were now claiming it as their own. The copyright certificate was real. The U.S. Copyright Office registration number checked out. Leo Sterling had filed a deposit for a musical composition titled Evening Comfort 2 years and 4 months ago. The attached MIDI file was a bland, synthesized version of the lullaby, but the melodic identity was uncontestable. For a paralyzing moment, Eli stared at the documents. The emotional truth of his mother's creation was now colliding with the cold, administrative truth of the law. Prior art, the handwritten manuscript, the testimonies of Anya and Ida, would be vital, but copyright disputes are brutal, public, and expensive. A billionaire fighting an unknown composer would be a PR nightmare, painting Eli as a Goliath crushing a David. But the alternative was unthinkable, allowing a stranger to legally own a piece of his mother's soul. Maya's reaction was more visceral. He heard it on the street. He must have heard *me**. The thought that her playing, her offering of comfort, had been harvested and claimed as intellectual property sickened her. The entire beautiful, fragile chain of gift-giving now had a parasite attached to it. Eli's legal team advised caution. They needed to investigate Leo Sterling before responding. What they found was puzzling. Leo wasn't a scam artist. He was a struggling freelance composer who wrote music for local theater productions and YouTube content creators. His social media showed a sincere, if modest, passion for music. There was no history of frivolous lawsuits. In a phone call arranged by lawyers, Leo sounded genuinely aggrieved, not greedy. "I composed Evening Comfort during a really difficult time in my life," he explained. "It came to me. I registered it to protect my work, and then I hear it being played by some street performer. That's my livelihood." Eli, listening in, asked the crucial question. "Where were you when you first composed it, Mr. Sterling?" A pause. "At the Westside Community Center. I sometimes volunteer there, teaching a basic music class for seniors. I was sitting at the old piano in the common room, just playing. It came out." The Westside Community Center. The name triggered a cascade in Eli's mind. He ended the call and immediately cross-referenced the address with Anya Petrova's journals and the patient list they'd been assembling. It took minutes. Patient ML, the young woman with cystic fibrosis. Her sister was a volunteer coordinator at the Westside Center. Patient JS, the retired teacher. He had been a board member there for a decade. The community center wasn't just a random location. It was a nexus point in the very network of people Anya had touched with the song. They visited the center the next day. The director, a warm woman named Helen, remembered Leo fondly. She also confirmed that many of their seniors came from the county hospital's outreach programs. When Eli, choosing his words carefully, hummed the lullaby, Helen's face softened with recognition. "Oh, that little tune, sure. We hear that here sometimes. One of our regulars, Marjorie, she hums it all the time. Says her nurse sang it to her when she was in the hospital years ago. It's very calming." Marjorie was 92 years old, sharp as a tack. She had a hip replacement 5 years prior. Her night nurse had been Anya Petrova. Anya had sung her the lullaby. Marjorie had brought it to the community center, humming it during pottery class, whistling it in the garden. It had become part of the sonic backdrop of the place. Leo Sterling, sitting at that piano, surrounded by the ambient memory of the melody, had genuinely believed the inspiration was his own. His brain had woven a familiar, floating fragment of sound into a new composition, and he had, in complete sincerity, claimed it. He wasn't a thief. He was another unwitting node in the network. The song had infected him, too. This was the "it gets worse" moment. The problem wasn't malicious theft. It was organic, uncontrollable proliferation. The melody was a benign virus, and Leo's copyright was just an immune response, a system trying to label and contain something that defied containment. Eli now faced a surreal choice: legally challenge a man who was, in a way, also a victim of the song's journey, or allow the copyright to stand, creating a permanent, false footnote to his mother's legacy. But as they dug deeper into the community center's world, they found the song's tendrils had spread even further. A local yoga instructor used a humming version of it during Savasana. A kindergarten teacher had made up innocent lyrics to the tune for quiet time. A small indie folk band had used a variation of the chord progression in a song on their last EP, crediting it as a traditional melody. The lullaby was no longer a single, traceable chain. It was a mycelial network, growing silently through the city's subcultures. Eli's worst fear was realized. His mother's private gift was public domain in everything but law. Maya, witnessing this explosion of connections, had a radical thought. What if we don't fight Leo? What if we join him? She proposed an audacious plan. They would approach Leo with the full story, the manuscript, the journals, the network map. They would show him he wasn't the originator but a carrier. And then, instead of a lawsuit, they would propose a collaboration. They would officially release the song, not under Eli's ownership or Leo's copyright, but as a collective work, with all proceeds going to fund music therapy programs in hospitals and shelters, a direct continuation of Anya Petrova's work. Eli was stunned. It meant relinquishing all control. It meant accepting the song as a living, changing entity. It meant sharing his mother's memory with the world and with a stranger who had accidentally claimed it. The part of him that was a builder of fortresses revolted, but the part that had heard his mother's voice in the journal, the part that understood her final wish, a song is not a thing to be owned, saw the profound symmetry in it. They met with Leo Sterling in a neutral conference room. Eli laid out the evidence, the scanned manuscript dated decades prior, Anya's journal entries mentioning Alina Vance by name, the testimonies from Ida and Marjorie. He showed him the map, the lines connecting the hospital, the shelter, the community center. Leo's initial defensiveness crumbled into bewildered awe. He had been so certain of his own originality. To discover that the melody that felt so personally his was actually a shared, city-wide inheritance was an existential shock. I just heard it in the air, he kept saying. Then Maya presented the proposal, a joint release, a foundation. Leo would amend his copyright to include Alina Vance as co-composer and the Vance Petrova Legacy Fund as the rights holder. His credit wouldn't be erased. It would be contextualized as part of the song's story. After a long, tense silence, Leo agreed. The relief in the room was palpable. A legal battle had been transformed into a partnership. The universe, it seemed, had one more twist in store. As their legal teams began drafting the new agreement, a routine audit of Leo's past work for a YouTube client triggered a Content ID flag. The automated system on the video platform had detected a segment of the lullaby in the background music of a popular vlogger's 3-year-old video. The vlogger had purchased the track from a royalty-free music library. Eli's team tracked down the library. The track was titled Tranquil Night. It was composed by someone listed as EV Productions. EV Alina Vance. With trembling hands, Eli accessed a forgotten legacy server from his early business ventures. There, amid old tax files and defunct business plans, was a folder labeled Mom's Music. Inside were crude digital recordings made by a teenage Eli of his mother playing various pieces. He had attempted, in a fit of youthful entrepreneurial spirit, to license them as stock music to a now-defunct website. The venture had gone nowhere, and he'd forgotten about it. But one track, it appeared, had been sold. The metadata showed a sale for $50 8 years ago. The buyer was a small, now-absorbed music library that had subsequently been bought by a larger one, which had then been acquired by the current giant. Somewhere in that corporate nesting doll, his mother's performance of the lullaby had been floating, anonymized for years. It had been downloaded, used, and heard by potentially millions of people, completely detached from its source. This was the final, staggering blow to the narrative of a contained, oral transmission. The song hadn't just traveled mouth to ear through a network of the sick and marginalized. It had also been pulsing through the digital bloodstream of the internet for nearly a decade. Maya hearing it from Ida was not a miracle of a short chain. It was an inevitability. The two transmission vectors, the human, compassionate network and the cold, digital marketplace, had existed in parallel, completely unaware of each other. The implications were overwhelming. It meant the song's journey was too vast, too complex to ever fully map. It meant that trying to claim it or even fully document it was a fool's errand. The song had achieved what very few things do. It had escaped its author completely and lived a life of its own. Eli sat in the dark of his home studio, the hum of the city a distant echo. He played the two versions back to back, his mother's pristine, heartfelt recording from the stock music file and Maya's raw, street-worn rendition from the night they met. They were the same song and yet completely different. One was a captured moment of love. The other was that love, weathered and changed by 1,000 unknowing hands, but somehow undeniably still love. He realized the fight was over. Not the legal arrangement with Leo that would precede, a necessary bureaucratic frame for a wild thing, but the internal fight, the need to protect, to preserve, to own. His mother hadn't just given the song to Anya Petrova. In her quiet way, through her son's forgotten teenage project, she had quietly released it to the world. She had set it free twice. He had spent 7 years building a tomb for a bird that was already flying across an ocean. The next morning, he called Maya and Leo. He told them about the stock music discovery. There was a long silence on the line. Then Leo, with the humility of a man whose world has been turned inside out twice, said, "So, what do we do now?" Eli's answer was simple. "We let it go, officially. We do the collaboration, we set up the fund. We tell the whole story, the manuscript, the nurse, the shelter, the community center, the copyright, the stock music, all of it. And then we put the song and the story into the public domain. We give it back." This was the major transition. The escalation was complete. The conflict had evolved from who stole the song, to how far has the song spread, to the final, unanswerable, what does it mean to own a memory that has become a city secret hymn? The battle was no longer against a person or a system, but against a possessive instinct itself. The stage was set for the payoff, not a victory in court, but a surrender to something far more powerful. The story was ready to become what the song already was, a gift without a return address. The release was not a grand concert. It was a quiet upload. A simple website went live, titled The Lullaby Project. On it, they placed 3 versions of the song, the pristine, scratchy recording of Eleanor Vance playing her piano, lifted from the stock music files, Maya's raw, street corner recording from the night Eli first heard her, and a new, collaborative arrangement by Leo Sterling, which wove together themes from both. Beneath the music, they told the whole story. They published scanned pages of Eleanor's manuscript, excerpts from Anya Petrova's journals with permissions, video interviews with Ida Rogers and Marjorie from the community center, and a clear, concise explanation of the copyright resolution. They announced the formation of the Vance Petrova Legacy Fund, with all proceeds from any downloads or licenses directed to music therapy programs. And they placed the song, irrevocably, into the public domain under a Creative Commons Zero license. A song that had been locked in a vault was now as free as air. The public response was a wave of quiet recognition, not viral fame. Music therapists wrote in, saying they'd used similar anonymous melodies for years and were grateful to have a story to attach to the practice. Nurses shared their own stories of small musical comforts given at bedsides, but most telling were the comments from ordinary people. "I swear I've heard this before. My grandmother used to hum something like this. This was in the background of a yoga class I took." The map they had tried to build was revealed to be just a small sketch of a vast, invisible continent. The song hadn't just traveled a few discrete paths, it had seeped into the city's collective unconscious. For the 3 people at the center, life recalibrated. Leo Sterling, once struggling for recognition, found a new purpose. He became a passionate advocate for ethical copyright and the folk process, using his story to teach about inspiration and cultural ownership. His career didn't explode with fame, but it gained a steady, respectful momentum. He still composed, but now he listened to the world with a more humble ear. Maya's relationship to her violin changed. She still played on the street to pay her rent, but the act felt different. She was no longer just a transmitter of dead composers' works. She was a potential node in a living network. She began to intentionally collect snippets of melody she heard, a busker's riff, an old man whistling on a bench, weaving them into her own compositions. She started a small online archive of street melodies, giving credit to the unnamed sources. The conservatory, initially skeptical of her very public entanglement with a billionaire, offered her a unique research fellowship on music, memory, and public space. She accepted. And Eli, the fortress was dismantled, brick by emotional brick. He moved out of the sterile, silent penthouse and into a smaller, brighter apartment filled with books and instruments he didn't know how to play. He took a less active role in the day-to-day operations of Vance Industries, focusing instead on the legacy fund. He found he had a talent not for building algorithms, but for listening. He sat on the fund's board alongside music therapists and social workers. His Billionaire's clout used to open doors for their small, impactful programs. He visited the community center often, not as a benefactor, but as a student. Marjorie taught him how to play the lullaby on the piano with one finger. It was the first time he had ever tried to play it himself. One afternoon, 6 months after the website launch, Eli was at the center when an older gentleman approached him. "You're a Leaner's boy, aren't you?" The man's name was Arthur. He had been a music copyist decades ago, working freelance for various composers. He had a story. In the late 1990s, he'd done some work for a private client, a woman who didn't want publication, just clean copies of her manuscripts for her own records. One of those pieces was the lullaby. "I always remembered it," Arthur said. "Such a simple, beautiful thing. She paid me and then she said something I never forgot. She said, 'I don't need these back. Do with them what you like. Maybe someone else needs a little beauty.'" Arthur, bound by a loose sense of professional discretion, had kept the copies, but he'd played the lullaby for his newborn granddaughter. He'd hummed it to his wife when she was ill. He'd, in his small way, also been a carrier. This was the final, surprising detail. Eleanor Vance hadn't just gifted the song orally to a nurse and digitally via her son's forgotten project. She had also given physical copies of the manuscript to a near stranger, with explicit permission to share it. Her campaign of release had been multi-fronted, deliberate, and breathtakingly generous. She had engineered the song escape from every possible angle. Eli listened to Arthur, and the last fragment of possessiveness dissolved. His mother hadn't been careless with her treasure. She had been meticulously, radiantly generous with it. The project's final update was a live event, but not in a concert hall. It was held in the common room of the Westside Community Center. Eli, Maya, and Leo sat at a table with Ida Rogers, Marjorie, Katerina Petrova, and Arthur the copyist. They weren't performing. They were just talking, telling their piece of the story to a room full of seniors, volunteers, and a few reporters. It was messy, overlapping, and beautiful. At the end, Maya took out her violin. She didn't play alone. She invited anyone who knew the melody to join her. Ida began to hum. Marjorie whistled softly. Leo found the chords on the old upright piano. And Eli, for the first time in front of anyone, sang the words his mother had written, words he realized he'd known all along, buried under years of grief. The moment wasn't perfect. The piano was out of tune. Someone's phone rang, but it was alive. The song was no longer a memory to be protected. It was a conversation happening in real time. It was being passed again in that room, adding the layer of that very day to its endless journey. As the informal music faded, Eli looked around the circle. He saw not a problem to be solved, but a constellation of connection that his mother had somehow, impossibly, foreseen. The billionaire and the busker, the nurse's daughter and the homeless woman, the struggling composer and the retired copyist, all linked by a sequence of notes composed in love. The hook that had frozen him on a street corner, "Where did you learn that song?" had been answered not with a single source, but with a tapestry of human experience. The mystery was solved, only to reveal a deeper truth. Some creations are not made to be owned, but to become connective tissue between strangers. The website remained. The fund grew, channeling resources to places where music meets pain. The song continued its journey, now with its passport stamped, its origin story attached like a friendly ghost. And Eli Vance, who once could not bear the silence of his own home, now found he could sit quietly and listen to the world, hearing in its countless fragmented melodies not noise, but the endless, beautiful echo of a single, generous idea. The work of his life was no longer about building walls around what was precious. It was about learning to recognize the precious things that were already free and making sure they kept moving, hand to hand, heart to heart. This was the payoff. Not ownership, but kinship. Not a locked vault, but an open window. So what is the true life of a song? Is it the moment it's composed or the moment it's heard? Is it held in the ink on a page or in the memory of a stranger? The story that began with a single, impossible question on a rainy street corner offers a quiet, radical answer. A song lives in the space between people. It lives in the giving. We often think of art as something to be captured, owned, and protected. We put it in museums behind glass. We encrypt it in vaults. We copyright it. But Alina Vance's lullaby teaches a different lesson. The most powerful art refuses to stay captured. It yearns to become a tool, a comfort, a secret handshake between souls who will never meet. It finds its purpose not in preservation, but in propagation. Think of the last time a melody stuck in your head, a tune you couldn't place. Think of the hummed snippet in a grocery line, the whistled phrase from a passerby. We are all surrounded by these floating fragments of beauty and memory, most of them orphaned, their origins long forgotten. The Joshua Bell experiment proved that context is everything, that we walk past masterpieces every day because they aren't framed on a stage. But this story suggests something more hopeful, that those masterpieces are walking with us, woven into the fabric of ordinary life, doing their quiet work whether we notice their pedigree or not. Eli Vance went searching for a thief and found a family. He sought to lock a ghost back in its vault and instead learned how to set his own grief free. The ultimate resolution was not a legal document or a financial settlement. It was a shift in perception, from seeing the song as a loss to be managed, to seeing it as a legacy that was actively, beautifully, outliving its creator. This is the lingering question the story leaves with us. What are the unnamed, unclaimed gifts moving through your life? The saying, the gesture, the little melody that calmed you once. We are all both potential custodians and potential conduits in these invisible networks of kindness. The choice is whether to clutch them close as private treasures or to do the braver, more generous thing, to pass them on without a label and trust that they will find the next person who needs them. The lullaby is still out there. It's in a therapy session, in a classroom, in the headphones of someone walking home after a hard day. Its story is attached now, but the melody itself belongs to no one and everyone. It is a small, persistent proof that love can be translated into sound, and that sound, once released, can never truly be lost. It simply changes hands. If this story resonated with you, consider the echoes in your own world. Have you ever been the receiver of an unlabeled gift, a moment of unexpected beauty that changed your day? Or have you been the giver, passing along a piece of comfort without knowing where it would land? Share your story in the comments below. We truly believe these threads of connection are what weave the real fabric of our communities. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this exploration of memory, music, and the unexpected ties that bind us. If you want to join us for more stories that look deeply at the human experience, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We leave you with a simple wish. May you recognize the secret songs already moving through your life, and may you have the courage to help them keep traveling.